We are so pleased and honored to welcome to the Ben Shapiro Show one of my ideological mentors and a guy who I think brought a lot of people into the conservative movement, Mark Levin, nationally syndicated talk show host of Levin TV, chairman of the Landmark Legal Foundation, and of course, author of 1,000 best-selling books, including Liberty and Tyranny. His new book is Rediscovering Americanism and the Tyranny of Progressivism. I have read it. It is, like all of his other books, a treatise on conservatism that everybody needs to read. Mark, thanks so much for joining the show.
Ben, it's a great honor. And let me just say this. I get no more joy than when I watch you on TV kicking some liberal around. I really do enjoy it.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, I mean, I have to say that I still recommend many of your older books. Men in Black is still the go-to book for me to recommend when it comes to judicial activism. So I want to talk about your new book because it really does something that I think we need to do as conservatives right now, which is re-educate our own side and other people about what our fundamental principles are, because we've gotten so caught up in the partisan bashing, which is fun and necessary, but we've got so caught up in it that sometimes we forget our own central principles. What exactly are we fighting for other than mean tweets about the other side? And so in Rediscovering Americanism, you talk about what the founders would have thought about today's America, and you basically say that they would have thought that the government is unrecognizable. Why do you think that?
Well, I do believe that. And so what I do is I go back to the beginning, the Declaration of Independence, and I look at the principles there. Laws of nature. When's the last time we talked about the laws of nature? I was never taught about the laws of nature. I took advanced philosophy and political science and history and all the rest of it. Yet this is the core of our founding. So where do these principles and ideas come from in the Declaration? The founders didn't invent them. What they did invent, though, is a country that was based on them, that had never been done before in world history and hasn't been done since. So when I started thinking about what I was going to write, I just started writing. And I didn't have chapters. I wrote the entire book, and then I went back and broke it into chapters as best I could. It's really two forces, and that is this force of the enlightenment, of individualism, of freedom, of unalienable rights. What Aristotle talked about, these universal law and truths, these eternal truths. Where did the founders get this from? Well, they tell us. Aristotle, Cicero, Locke, Sidney, and a whole bunch of others. And so I went back. I've read them before. I went back and read them again. And I tried to pull information from them to inform people who are interested in what the founders were reading. And why is that important? Because when you start to read this material, even though you and I, we love our country, you really even love it more because you realize, wow, these ideas are absolutely incredible. And they predate this country. And they go back thousands and thousands of years. And so I felt if more and more people fully understood what we mean, rather than the surface level, I believe in liberty and I believe what that means, then more and more people can spread the word. Conversely, there's a dark side and a bleak side and a miserable side. And that's what we call progressivism. I don't like the word. I wrote a whole book called Meritopia, condemning the word. But to be historically accurate, that's their nomenclature. So I talk about progressivism in the progressive era, and where does that idea come from? And who are their philosophers? And you have to look at people like Rousseau and Hegel and Marx, among others, and you realize how completely contrary that is to our founding principles. And then you look at the so-called intellectuals who advanced those principles in what I call this counter-revolution to the American Revolution, people like Woodrow Wilson and Crowley and Weil and Dewey and so forth and so on. And I explain who they are, I explain what their ideas are, and I quote them. And I quote them a lot, so people don't think I'm making this stuff up. And they attack the Declaration, and they attack these principles. Even the word liberty. Folks need to understand that there's some controversy around this word liberty. You and I, we mean, the circle of liberty that surrounds each individual human being, God-given liberty, God-given unalienable rights, like it says in the Declaration. Again, they talk about laws of nature and nature's God. What does that mean? Does that mean you have to be religious? No. What it means is, though, that there are things bigger than man. There are ideas, truths bigger than man, eternal universal truths. So if you're born in Washington, D.C., or you're born in Paris, France, you know right from wrong. You know the golden rule. You know you're not supposed to kill people or rob people. That's not because they're laws made by man. It's because these are things we know when we reason through them. And that's what the framers believed when they wrote the Constitution, too. The progressives, however, by name, it's why I quote them, attack these principles. They attack the Declaration. They say the Declaration was a revolutionary document for a revolutionary period, pioneers, throwbacks, but today is today. We can't worry about all these mystical ideas, these eternal truths. We got to look at the world as it is today. We have to intuit and rationalize and figure out what the truths are and create this society where the experts are trained and professionals are trained to try and address the problems we have today, which leads us to this massive administrative state that's not in the Constitution, that passes 4,000 laws a year without our consent. They don't care what we think about them. They go on whether we have elections or not. And this is what I try and get across in the book. And also I interlink the principles, because they are, which is individualism, freedom, private property rights, and constitutional republicanism. You need every one of those elements to be a fulsome human being in order to pursue your interests and so forth. When one is under attack, they're all under attack. And today, they're all under attack.
Well, Mark, one of the things that is fascinating in your book, and you talk about this with regard to the progressive era, the book, again, is Rediscovering Americanism. One of the things that's fascinating is that the progressives, when they first came around, they were actually very open about the fact that they were attacking the founding, that they thought the Declaration of Independence was passé. Woodrow Wilson did a whole speech in which he talked about how the Constitution of the United States needed to be put aside and shelved because it was just hampering our ability to get things done. Today's left seems to have understood that it is a mistake to attack those terms, and so they're a lot more insidious. You see Barack Obama, I thought his second inaugural address was perfect proof of this, where he started actually quoting the founders to justify precisely the opposite of what the founders would have wanted, and that's why I think it's so important that you distinguish what they would have wanted. But did the founders' language, I mean, I love the founders as much as you do, did the founders' language leave the opening for the left to take it and run with it? In other words, when they say things like, we hold these truths to be self-evident, and the left says, well, it's not self-evident to me, but here is a self-evident truth. A self-evident truth is that poor people can't take care of themselves, and so we need a welfare state. Or it's a universal law of nature, there will be poor people. In other words, did natural law, I know this is a big kind of abstruse debate between West Coast Straussians and East Coast Straussians, but is there did the doctrine of natural law that the founders all believed universally, did that open the door to the possibility of a progressive twisting of that terminology, do you think?
Well, you know, they put in place this Constitution, which was the governing manifestation of these principles in the Declaration. So they thought they did the very best they could to put these checks and balances in place with direct election of the House, the state legislatures electing the Senate, an electoral college process for the President of the United States, judges who would be immune from elections and so forth, and they explained what they did. But to answer that question, there's a letter in the book from Thomas Jefferson to John Adams. And these are two old men at this point, and Jefferson is just ruminating about Rome, a little bit about Athens and Rome, and he says, obviously I'm paraphrasing, he says, John, I've been thinking about Rome. And he said, they had Cicero, great man, they had Cato, great man, they had Brutus, great man. These are men who were small r Republicans and who put their lives on the line, challenging the emperor and the system that was in place and the corruption and so forth. And he said, if all those men together were able to fashion a government, a Republican government, it would have failed. And he said, and the reason is I've been thinking about this, because the people lacked virtue. There was nothing that could be done to save that society. Even if Caesar had been gone and those three men ruled and put in place the Republican form of government, it wouldn't have worked. It was too late. So to answer your question, I don't point to the founders and the language of natural law as the reason why we are where we are. We are where we are, excuse me, because of this invidious ideology that has taken place. And they have their Alinsky tactics and their Marxist tactics and all these other tactics and so forth and so on. But as a people, either we believe in liberty, regardless of what the media say and the demagogues say, either we in our hearts and our soul and our minds want to be a free people or we don't. And I would suggest to you that about a third of us want to be a free people, about a third of us don't, and about a third of us don't give a damn. And so that's about where we are today, I think.
Which, I mean, The good news is that was exactly the breakdown during the American Revolution, and the right
Exactly.
guys ended up winning. The bad news is that we could certainly lose. So with that in mind, Mark, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you if you had to give some advice to President Trump right now on what he could be do to further the cause of the causes you're talking about. I'm not sure that President Trump thinks a lot about ideas like natural law
Right.
or constitutionalism, but he could be an effective tool for these things if he would do some of the right things. So what do you think, President Trump ought to do at this point to promulgate the sorts of values you talk about in Rediscovering Americanism? And on the same page, is there anyone in Congress that can be trusted to forward these values at all? Because obviously Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan are doing a pretty shoddy job of it thus far.
Paul Ryan called me many months ago when he was pushing his nonsense with this Obamacare. And I had told his people, I don't want to talk to him. Why waste his time? But he insisted, so I spoke to him. The first thing he says to me is, I read all your books. And I said, but do you digest them? Because obviously you read all the books, do you digest them? And I said, and why are you wasting your time calling me? And for 45 minutes, we had this chat last time. Look, the problem right now with the administration is it's under a full-bore attack, and they're trying to dislodge this president. I don't agree with this president on everything, as you well know, and I backed Ted Cruz in the Republican primary. There are things I do agree with this president on, and including his selection of judges, his attack on the regulatory state, and certain other things. But what I cannot accept is the effort by the left to continue to try and destroy this republic and the election results. And that's what I see going on with a lot of this Russia stuff. Mistakes or no mistakes, the left was going to find something and will continue to look for something in order to overturn this election, the way they attack the Electoral College, the way they attack all elements of our constitutional system. If I were advising the president, I would say take a closer look at the judiciary, because 40% of these judges were appointed by Barack Obama. We have many vacancies, and Schumer is slow walking them, and he's slowing them down. I would pull Mitch McConnell in my office, and I would say, all right, damn it, get rid of that filibuster rule. If that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do. We're up against this entrenched, radical, leftist mob, and if they're prepared to burn the place down, I'm not prepared to burn the place down, but the filibuster rule is the filibuster rule, and you're going to have to suspend it if we're going to get anywhere. I mean, the Senate, quite frankly, is this absurd entity now since the 17th Amendment, where we have two people elected directly from the people of each state. Well, why do we need the Senate? As a side point, I start to ramble here. As a side point, I love it when the left says, let's get rid of the Electoral College. We don't need any. Well, let's get rid of the Senate. I mean, the Senate was supposed to represent the state legislatures. Why do we have 2 senators from every state if they don't represent the state legislatures? But I think he should focus on that. I also think if they don't drop that filibuster rule, he's not going to get much done, and Mitch McConnell's not going to get much done. I've been saying we ought to repeal and replace McConnell because he is going to kill the Republican majority in that Senate. So there's no easy answer to that question. As to who we can rely on, I can tell you Mike Lee is a very earnest and studious constitutional conservative. I think Ted Cruz is the same. I think Rand Paul, in most instances, I don't always agree with him, is similar. And there's a handful of others. The problem is the overwhelming majority are not. And the reason is the Republican Party, I think, is largely a progressive party. They have never eliminated any departments or any agencies. They've never seriously curbed their power or cut their budgets. They don't attack the debt when they're in office. Look at this Obamacare debate. This is a perfect example that I would relate to the book. It's not in the book, but we relate to the principles in the book. The entire debate is on the progressive field. We got to save Medicaid. Well, who's killing Medicaid? They mean to expand. We've gone from repeal Obamacare to expand Medicaid. But most of us aren't on Medicaid. That's a welfare program. What about the rest of us? And so Ted Cruz offers this incredibly radical amendment, which says, okay, look, offer your damn Obamacare policy, insurance companies, but let them offer whatever they want to the rest of us. Oh my God, you can't do that. Why? Well, it might hurt Frank and Sally and Damien and this one and that one. In other words, there's a complete abandonment of liberty, of market capitalism and competition that has created this magnificent society, industrial revolution. This is the only place where 3 a.m, you could walk down the street to a 7-Eleven and buy darn near anything you want. Or at 10 in the morning, go into a grocery store. You've got stuff from all over the country, all over the world. Almost everyone can afford it. We live like kings and queens could never live 200 years ago. We can get on a jet and fly from one part of the country to another part, really for a fairly inexpensive amount. An air-conditioned luxury at 600 miles an hour, 40,000 feet off the ground. And if you want, they'll serve you peanuts while you're doing it. I mean, think about what the principles of the founding created, right? And think about what they're doing to it. And they attack it all the time. So I got to tell you, Ben, my perspective on this is Washington is lost. We vote, we do the very best we can. This is the design they have created, which is a perversion of what the founders intended. We've got to convince each other as citizens, the way the colonists did, of the greatness of this country, of the disaster of the other side. And if we can't win minds and hearts, then we can't win.
The book is Rediscovering Americanism and the Tyranny of Progressivism, another #1 New York Times bestseller from Mark Levin, who is the author of just a bevy of them at this point. Mark, thanks so much for everything that you do, and thanks so much for joining the show. I always appreciate it.
It's a great honor. I love when you fill in for us. My audience loves it too, and God bless.
Thanks so much.